Thank you for joining us today as we share our petition signed by over 950 Vermonters from across the state asking for the legislature's support of public transportation. My name is Kati Gallagher. I work with the Vermont Natural Resources Council as a Sustainable Communities Program Director, but as part of that role, I'm very lucky to serve as the coordinator for the Transportation for Vermonters Coalition, which is a diverse group of organizations, businesses, institutions, and others committed to working together to advocate for a well-funded, accessible, and equitable transportation system for the good of Vermonters, our communities, and our climate. We are made up of about 14 advocacy members, but we also have over a dozen other formal and informal partners that contribute to our work, including many who helped to share this petition far and wide, which we're very appreciative of. The coalition was started in 2017, in part to highlight the fact that transportation is such an interconnected issue. It affects everything from housing to our physical health to affordability, accessibility, and that interconnectedness is really reflected in our membership and in the signatories to this petition. In addition to those 950 plus that signed on as individuals, we also had organizational sign-ons from social service organizations like Community Rides Vermont and the Southeastern Vermont Community Action, grassroots organizations like 350 Vermont, Interfaith Power and Light, Vermonters for People-Oriented Places, and Third Act Vermont, and we have rural transit providers like Southeast Vermont Transit and Rural Community Transportation. And we're here today because public transportation, and when we say public transportation, we're talking about not just those big buses, but also things like microtransit and other modes of shared transportation. It's facing critical funding challenges. These are not challenges that are unique to Vermont, but it's incumbent upon us to explore what potential solutions would look like for our rural state. You'll hear more specifically about why accessible public transit is so important for our communities from the speakers coming after me, but some key points that I wanted to make up front. First is that we have to remember that our transportation system is intrinsically connected to access to healthcare and our schools. So when we're talking about consolidation, that requires complementary investments in transportation so that people can still get to that care and to our education places. Second, many employers and institutions depend on reliable and affordable public transit that enables their employees, as well as students and residents, to get to work and commute sustainably. And transportation access is a critical part of how we plan for new housing development. We can't lose the affordability of new housing by ignoring the higher transportation costs that can come without planning sustainably. And just to note that typically a household's second largest expenditure around there is transportation, and that's particularly true for our more rural communities. Adding to this urgency, we have our state's largest transit provider, Green Mountain Transit, that's already having to cut services as a result of these challenges, and our rural providers aren't too far behind. So we're here to urge Vermont leaders to transition Vermont's transportation fund to better reflect Vermonters' needs and to commit to stabilizing public transit in the near term by identifying sustainable, dedicated funding. There have been several studies requested by the legislature over the past couple of years that have produced recommendations and potential solutions. So we are asking our legislators to prioritize exploring these options and making the admittedly difficult policy decisions needed that will allow us to develop a modern transit system that provides better health outcomes, a cleaner, more resilient environment, accessible labor supply for employers, reduce social isolation, and lower transportation cost burdens. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Senator Wendy Harrison.
Thank you, Kati. I think I was there at that first meeting in 2017, and thank you for bringing together this coalition. It's really important. So I'm Wendy Harrison. I represent Windham District, and I serve on the Transportation Committee in the Senate. I'm also the Senate designee to the Public Transit Advisory Council, as well as the Rail Council, which obviously need to work together. But here we are talking about transit, which is one of my favorite topics. Transit checks all the boxes. It's good for the environment. It's good for riders' health. It's good for economic development. It gets people to and from work. It's good for housing, not only providing access to housing, but allowing one-car families to be able to thrive. It's good for education, as Katie said, for both adults and kids. It's essential for some of us who don't drive or can't drive, particularly older adults and those who are differently abled. Transit, by definition, includes interaction with other people. This can be a quick nod, a friendly smile, or a big city no eye contact, but whatever the level, it promotes community, and community is something we need today. It also encourages folks to move to a new place. Most recently, I've been talking about how train travel would improve and increase our population, particularly for younger people. But transit is so important to make trains work. You need to have a complete system in order to work. An example of a system that is working well, in the Deerfield Valley, the way you can tell it's working well is that advertisements for the sale of homes include that the home is served by the mover bus. This shows the economic value of transit and that that system is providing good service. We need that level of service throughout Vermont. A transit system has a threshold of service that it needs to be effective. If a system gets you one way to your destination, but is closed or out of service when you need to go home, that is not an effective service. So if we have a service that looks at both ends, we're actually going to get double the amount of ridership. Our ridership will increase exponentially if we have a good service. Bus riders need safe places to wait for the bus, places that look inviting or at least not scary to drivers passing by who might want to use transit. Potential riders need good information on how buses work. Transit does work in Vermont and can work in Vermont, but it must work better. We need to capitalize on our historic patterns in village centers. In some places here, the village center has a really good system, and then we can connect the village centers with each other by a less frequent system. That works well. So we need concentrated, frequent routes in the downtown centers. We need to connect those centers to each other, and then we need to connect to other modes conveniently, such as train stations and airports. So help us help you by letting your legislators know how important transit is to you. When I talk to people who are maybe telling me about healthcare and prices of healthcare and the problems with the healthcare system, transportation is their number 2 issue. When people talk to me about schools, transportation is their number 2 issue. It's always number 2, and people assume that we can't do anything about it. We can do something about it. I'm really interested, and I'm going to advocate for having a analysis showing the benefit of transit along with the cost of improving the system. Because right now we've just talked about the cost of improving the system, which are not tremendous, and I know that they are much less than the benefits that we'll get from the system. But we need to get real and start paying attention to these surveys and studies that we've done. And I just want to recognize my colleague Molly Burke, Representative Molly Burke, who is also on the Public Transit Advisory Commission or committee, and has been working on transit for years. And many of us have been working for years, and it's time to just get it done, get a good system in place, and we will reap the benefits. Thank you for being here.
I could not have said any of that better myself. My name is Leonora. I'm the rep from Essex Town and a portion of the city of Essex Junction. And I sat on the transportation committee last year and learned so much about the limitations. You know, we would hear a lot about the limitations sitting in committee regarding the dwindling transportation dollars, as we depend so much for our infrastructure for transportation in the state on a gas tax, which is not progressive, to be honest, in a rural state. And as we hit one goal, which is to make cars more fuel efficient and get off fossil fuels, we are shooting ourselves in the foot in terms of being able to fund the transportation infrastructure that we very much still depend on. So it can be frustrating, and I want to acknowledge that. I also want to say that this focus on public transit is the most direct relationship between equity work in our state and economic improvement and environmental justice. By taking away dollars from public transit, we are discouraging the people who have an option from actually choosing to ride the bus. By taking away transportation dollars from public transit, we are punishing the very people who have no other choice. We know from surveys conducted in the past that GMT and other riders on the bus are disproportionately Black and brown, disproportionately people in the lowest economic, with so much economic insecurity, people who do not own a car, people who would not be able to get to their appointments to the doctor without this help, without this public transit system. Our agency in where I live, which happens to be Green Mountain Transit, has outperformed similarly sized public transit agencies around the country. They have gotten almost all of the federal dollars that they have, that they could possibly be eligible to get because of the efficient and positive performance, ridership numbers, route efficiency, satisfaction, all kinds of metrics that the feds used to at least recognize and would give about $600,000 of funding a pop per each 6 metrics. We comfortably got 4 out of those 6. Sadly, once the spigot is closed, it's really hard to maintain contracts with drivers. It's really hard to maintain buses. And our state, just like in so many areas, whether it's farming or education or health, we are looking at a very dark time where our state is going to have to truly prioritize our most vulnerable. And if we don't, we're looking at even worse loss. It's a life or death issue. For me, public transit is a life or death issue. I know countless immigrants and new Americans in Vermont who depend on the buses to get to and from work. They are the people that we never see, that we rarely acknowledge, and who are the backbone of the dairy industry and increasingly, construction. They're no longer going to be living only on farms, hidden away where they just have to walk from a broken down trailer to the parlor. And they are the future of our state. So if we do not make this public transit system work for those most vulnerable people, our economy fails.
Afternoon. My name is Chloe Tomlinson, and I represent Winooski, and I serve on the House Transportation Committee. I want to start by thanking the nearly 1,000 Vermonters who are taking a stand and signed this petition calling us to invest in public transit and to align our public transportation dollars with the needs of Vermonters. Public transit is essential to making sure our transportation system meets the basic mobility needs of all Vermonters, including those who can't afford a car, our elders, who can no longer drive, youth who don't yet have a license, newly arrived refugee and immigrant families, folks with disabilities, and any others who can't access a driver's license. Public transit is housing, it's healthcare, it's economic opportunity, and it's connection to community. When people don't have reliable access to transportation, it hinders their ability to get to the doctor, to get to work, to childcare, and to shop for food and other basic needs. Additionally, it's affordability, something that we're being called to focus on this session. Vermont households spend more than $3,200 on average on transportation expenses annually, up from $2,600 in 2019. And that transportation burden falls the hardest on lower income households and more rural households who pay a higher percentage of their income in transportation costs. So investments in public transit are investments in affordability. And public transit not only impacts individuals or households, but all of us. It adds to the economic vibrancy of our communities, decreases congestion, protects our air quality, and decreases our emissions, which is particularly important as our transportation sector makes up the biggest portion of our greenhouse gas emissions. Unfortunately, however, in our transportation budget of nearly $900 million, only 6% is going to public transit, and this is a 5% decrease from last year. We need to robustly fund public transit and work towards a sustainable revenue source for this essential system. We should be investing in a future where Vermonters can get where they need to go in a way that doesn't break their budget, that helps us reach our climate goals, and that builds community. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Hi, everyone. I'm Kelly Stoddard with AARP Vermont. I'm the Associate State Director on behalf of AARP. AARP is committed to improving the quality of life for older Vermonters, and access to reliable public transportation is a critical part of our mission. The petition signed reflects the collective voice of hundreds of Vermonters advocating for better public transit options across our state. Access to public transportation is essential for our independence, mobility, and social inclusion, especially for adults. We know the vast majority of older adults want to be able to age in their community. They have deep connections with their family, with their friends, with their neighbors. However, many of our communities across the state have not been designed to facilitate independence for non-drivers. For many, hanging up the keys to the car means a loss of independence. Stronger public transit options can help reduce social isolation, improve access to our healthcare system, ultimately ensuring better health outcomes. Public transportation investments can stimulate our local economy by providing greater access to businesses and services and amenities, benefiting both rural and urban areas. AARP calls on our lawmakers to prioritize funding and legislation that supports public transit services for all Vermonters. We urge state leaders to commit to solutions that ensure people of all ages and abilities can fully participate in Vermont's vibrant communities. We stand with Vermont residents in advocating for transportation systems that are accessible, reliable, and equitable for all. Thank you.
Greetings, my name is Lefluer. I actually live in one of those real small towns, actually in Grand Isle County and Franklin County, the small town called Allburg. I use he, him pronouns. For me, transportation is the most important, aspects of Vermont as a whole, because it's vital and essential to our access needs. No matter what you have, everybody has access needs, no matter what it is. And transportation is vital to our economics in general, our workforce. Without transportation, Vermont will fail and will go into existence if we do not keep that vital part of transportation. For me and my fellow colleagues here, this is not just important to me and myself, but to family members, like I said, people that are low income, individuals that need transportation, not as a priority, but also viability and life. To them, transportation means freedom in certain ways, so they can access those access needs. Doctors, nurses, workforce. We got members of the public within the transportation not just work on first shift, second shift, and third shift. Third shift is very, very vital to the state. As we may know, most third shift, individuals, workforce across Vermont rely on transportation the heaviest, the most, because there's no service at that time. And when we're talking about, transportation, we got to understand that it's that Vermont has that, distinct notion of, supporting its members. And transportation is a big key of that moving forward. I think, with my colleagues up here, no matter where you are, who you are, where you're from, transportation is vital to, and one of the vital keys to our economics. Without transportation, our economics will crumble. Our infrastructure will crumble. Our finance will crumble. Our very life will cease to exist if transportation goes away. And I'm here to, support my friends, my families, my coworkers, everybody here that makes Vermont great, because to me, this is how Vermont gets this done together as a collaboration, as a state. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Helena Kehne, and I'm a longtime GMT rider of the GMT transit systems. I also have a disability that does not allow me the privilege to own a car or drive, so I ride the GMT systems in order to get around the state. I'm attending this public forum because I have a couple minutes to share just a little bit about my experience as a person with a disability who rides the GMT systems and depends on our public transit services. I live in a rural area in Vermont, in Washington County, without public transit services. So what that means for me is, in order for me to access the GMT services, such as Link Express from Montpelier to Burlington, I need to rely on friends and family and roommates to get me to and from the transit center, that in the morning and the evening, just so I can catch my bus up to Burlington to go to my full-time job. That doesn't only apply to my work, that also applies to my life in general. I use public transit to go all around the state since I don't have access to working to a vehicle. And if you take these services away from us, from all individuals with or without vehicles, folks who prefer to use public transit services because environmentally friendly and also just in general, if you take those away from us, you'll be robbing a lot of people, a lot of Vermonters who really depend on these services to live their lives. So many Vermonters rely on public transit routes to live their lives. I already feel bad enough at times having to ask others for assistance to get me to and from the routes that bring me around the state. Also, but having the access to public transit services through GMT without transit route cuts can also help so many of us without personal means of transit and getting from point A to point B in the community. So if bus routes are cut, you will see a drop in ridership. People won't be able to afford to live in their communities. People won't be able to go to their jobs. They'll have to move out of their communities, and they won't have a way to get to and from the communities. So what I'd like to see done, what needs to be done, is for GMT, for transportation, to stop cutting major bus routes that serve our communities all over Vermont, find the funding and resources to help grow, help improve, help maintain Vermont's public transit services so we can thrive as a community. It's absolutely possible. Yes, it's absolutely possible. It may not happen right away, but if the transit routes are kept rather than continuing to be taken away from us, there will be a gradual uptick in ridership and satisfaction in the greater GMT and Vermont communities. Thank you. Everyone needs transit in this state. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much to all of our speakers and everybody who is here. We will be delivering this petition to our House and Senate leadership and look forward to continuing to work with our transportation committees, as well as members from other committees like Representative Dodge, who was joining us earlier, who understand the relevance of transportation outside of just our transportation committees, but touching on housing and healthcare and human services and the environment and natural resources and economic development. Thank you very much.